All right, cool. And we are live. Uh, Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a beautiful Wednesday evening. I'm Fuzz, and with us we have Tong Sheng, who's our guest speaker today for the architecture session. And I'll be jumping in a bit into understanding and trying to tell you guys what exactly the whole group and the meetup is all about. So let me just quickly add my screen to the thingy. And if I can just figure out where my sliding thing is. Okay, cool. This is good. All right, cool. So this is basically SARCCOM, short for Software Architecture Community. And this is our first meetup in Malaysia. SARCCOM as a community has existed in Indonesia. That's where the origin is from for the last 3 years. It's been there since 2016 and mid of 2016. And they have been very active in Indonesia to bring the whole idea of software architecture, to talk about what's the best way to do architecture, different workshops and conferences. One of the ways I found out about this was because I've been here for quite some time, and some of you who are joining us, if you know me and know Tong, that we were previously part of the Google Cloud developer community, and we used to see that there are a lot of sessions and meetups happening for tooling, for languages, and even for the cloud, right? Different cloud providers having different things. But we didn't see a lot for architecture. Although architecture was spoken about, and you'll see in a bit of time about the different kinds of architectures we're talking about over here. It used to always have a different context within the meetup. So, and we used to see, okay, there isn't much of a community or even a discussion happening on software architecture in general. So this is an idea that's been there on the burner for quite some time. It's been there for almost a year, and SARCCOM Indonesia were very kind enough to give us the chance to actually start a chapter in Malaysia and to see how it grows over here. I do know personally some people who I've spoken to over here in Malaysia who are related to architecture in some form or the other, whether it's from a job title or even from the day-to-day work, and they have resonated with me on certain aspects of why on architecture decisions, on trying to do best practices, trying to understand how to even build an application properly in the first place. So you'll see along the months, as and when our meetups keep happening, that we will be touching upon different realms in IT in general, right? So whether it's just software in general, or whether it's about infrastructure and the cloud, and even DevOps, and even Agile for that matter. So you see that in a bit. So to begin with, I'll just start with some housekeeping rules. Feel free to ask any questions on the YouTube comments. You've already joined us on YouTube, so you can just put in a comment over here, and we'll just pop it into the banner. Also, we have a Slido poll available, and the idea for this poll is just to understand where you people are coming from an architecture perspective. I'll be putting it in a little later, maybe during the first talk or after the first talk, so that we get more crowd in. One of the things of having a virtual meetup is that it's kind of difficult to know when people are in and not. So we'll just, as much as possible, try to gather some folks in and do this. Also, the live stream is available on Engineers Mind, the YouTube channel. So after you see this, and if you're catching this on a later date or time, it's always going to be available over there. And that is basically a segue for me to go to our sponsor. So Engineers Mind has been very helpful in providing all the infrastructure for running community meetups. If you're new to the whole Engineers Mind concept, Engineers Mind is a community of builders, of engineers. You don't have to be an engineer to join it. We are very active on Slack, and there are a lot of communities that are joined together at the hip with Engineers Mind. So do join us on the Slack channel. We are pretty active over there, and we don't bite usually, unless there is some bike shedding happening. But yeah, so Engineers Mind is one of the places you can join in if you are new to start into tech communities in general. So I'll just lay out a bit of our roadmap at a high level on what we are expecting as part of the whole SARCCOM vision. And one of the things we want to start with, which is our first meetup over here, is our monthly meetups. And the idea is that we're going to invite community speakers, folks maybe who all are watching right now, and maybe people who can contribute more to the architecture discussion. And we also want to share provide this as a space for sharing architecture experience, and whether it's a success or a failure, it doesn't matter. It's all about the learnings. As much as possible, we want people to come and talk about, okay, how we actually built a certain application or solved a certain business problem with an architecture, and maybe it didn't pan out very well, but the fact that we learned something out of it and that we were able to do something better later is definitely a good lesson to share across. And through SARCCOM, we also want to build a set of community speakers. So here's the thing, right? We have a lot of, like I said, communities over here which are talking about languages, and they talk about different tooling and frameworks, and a lot of them go pretty deep into those specific languages. It's pretty awesome in a way, right? A lot of things even go over my head to understand. But sometimes you just want to step back and then connect all these pieces together and try to get up to a working solution, right? Get into a working product of such sort. This is where we want these meetups to be a place where you can actually come in and share about this. So even if you're a person who hasn't spoken on a tech stage before in front of a community, we want this to be a place where you can actually come and share and say, hey, you know what, this is the kind of application I built from an architecture perspective. So we don't have to delve too much into the language aspect of things, unless it actually adds some value to the discussion. And it gives everyone a more common sense of understanding of what's being built. And you'll notice with architecture, it's all about language and it's all about communication versus it just being a certain tech. So that's one of the things we want to do with our monthly meetups. We also are looking at having workshops. We are still deciding on the first one, but hopefully once it starts, we are going to have maybe at least once in a quarter some kind of a workshop that brings hands-on exercises and concepts to the community. We also want to encourage people to study for certifications, whichever side of the table you are in terms of this discussion on whether certifications are useful or not. We know one thing that it does help when you're especially working in a certain place and you want to grow in your career. So we want to take any kind of certification that is related to architecture and then try to talk about that more. And we know there's a lot of certs out there already for this, whether you're talking about TOGAF or whether you're talking about ITIL or anything else. Even me, myself, I don't have any of them. So I would definitely want to use this as a way to, learn and get towards that. We also want to look at collaboration with other communities because, like I said, right, it's just a fledgling community and we're starting a bit. There are other communities out there who are pretty good at what they do. Like we have DevOps Malaysia over here who has been spearheading the whole DevOps conversation across companies, whether it's enterprises or startups, whether it's development through other languages in other communities, and even the Agile community, which we have over here. There are a couple of them. The idea is to bring them together, do a collab, and then tie that back into the whole architecture discussion so that people can actually learn and build products better. Last is more of a dream and a vision. I hope one day we are able to do conferences, and a conference basically is kind of like a 1 or 2 day event where you have a community get together of sorts. You have like speakers and multiple tracks if possible, and the idea is to bring in speakers from across the region and the globe. Right now, the situation is unique. We are in COVID. We can't travel anywhere. But definitely, based on the uptake from the community, we want to see us having at least a day's session of talks from different speakers so that we can understand better of how other people are also building products, and also have workshops and labs in this case. So quickly, what I'm going to do is I just want to show you all about SARCCOM itself. So SARCCOM Indonesia, if you just go to sarccom.org, let me just put it over here. Anna, and yeah, so sarccom.org is basically the website for the community, and they have been there since 2016, and they have done a lot of events, right? And Indonesia is a very big country. The fact that they are able to still grow beyond, the normal stuff. They have a lot of speakers coming in from different companies, they are backed by a lot of companies out there in Indonesia, companies which you also have heard of, and they have a lot of sessions that they've been doing over the years. They have also done 2 software architecture conferences. I was supposed to join it last year, but I found out I actually found out about the conference one day after it got over. It's kind of weird, which is how this whole thing started in the first place. And they have some pretty good sessions. It's already recorded on YouTube, so please do go through this. It's pretty valuable stuff out there. And we want to add more to this corpus. We want to ensure that we are able to add in more knowings and workshops and content if required. So do reach out, do check this out. Do reach out to the organizers. Freddie and Bayu, they are pretty good people, awesome guys to connect with, and they have a certain way of talking about architecture which I really like, about trying to simplify things. And you'll see that a lot with the kind of topics over here. It's not only just about taking an architecture diagram and then dissecting it. It's also about talking about the culture behind it, talking about the thinking and the philosophy behind architecture. So you'll see that more. That's something we're trying to cater to over here in Malaysia. Hopefully that is something that comes out, translates very well over here. So you can go through their website and check what else is happening. They have the team, they have the testimonial, and then learnings. So do check the YouTube channel for this. Cool. So quickly, what we're going to do is I'm going to verbally tell what the agenda is, because I did not, frankly, get to writing it down in a slide. We will have a section called Buzzcorner, and this is basically inspired by other communities out there in Malaysia, where the communities talk about the happenings in their space, right? So whether it's in a DevOps space or whether it's in, let's say, in a cloud provider space, the idea of what's happening in that. And architecture is a very different kind of a beast over here. You're talking about sharing what other companies are doing, and you'll notice that with architecture, even though there's a lot of new concepts happening, it's rare to find companies sharing it very often. You would usually, if you're talking about any architecture concept, it would usually be referring to an article from at least a year, 2 years ago. So we'll try to see as much as possible what to cover in Buzzcorner so that it doesn't overlap with other communities. But yeah, we thought this is a good way to start. So the first one, item we want to present is in 2019, late 2019, Google had actually come out with an architecture for cloud native security, and this is basically a white paper which they had released called Beyond Prod. And the idea is to move beyond a traditional perimeter based security model and instead leverage service identity as security cornerstones. And the whole idea is to have this governance model for cloud native security in a containerized world, right? So from the get-go, the assumption is that anything you're going to build is going to be in containers and microservices. And these microservices are going to talk to each other. You want to make sure that you're able to secure them in a much better manner, but also not have them secure in a private network. So one of the things they want to do is that they assume that every service is talking to each other on the public internet, right? On a public network as such. And it's your job to actually harden the security over there, create choke points if needed. And it sets a lot of fundamental principles as part of the paper. And this includes running code of known provenance and also how to define a standard way to roll out changes. Definitely something you should look at. I would suggest to have a look at this, because from a conceptual perspective, you will notice for the last few years with the cloud coming into the picture, and in my talk, I'll be talking about what the cloud entails. It has taken a lot of the concepts we have taken for granted over the years and turned it on its head. So one of the approaches, you can see what Google says over here, is to have, and this translates very well to other infrastructure also. They've also given a list of open source apps you can use to actually build out a whole beyond prod kind of a concept. So the idea is that you have a front end and then you have an application front end, you have protection with ELTS, and you are forwarding stuff through EUC tickets, and you have an authentication service, which is also being called, but that's also secure. And so the idea is that everything is just sitting out there, right? And you can think of this an analogy of having shops in a market where everything is open, but you secure it from your side as much as possible. And this allows you to avoid all that false sense of security which you think you will have in an application when it's sitting in a private network. That's basically the approach Google is talking about. Your mileage may vary, but this is something definitely you would want to explore when you're looking at your architecture at a higher level. Next up is knowledge graphs. And eBay has been working on something known as an intelligent architecture as part of reining in all their multiple applications and services internally in eBay. And the way they do this is by leveraging knowledge graphs. And knowledge graphs basically define and describe knowledge domains. And based on expert input data and machine learning algorithms, you are able to create this massive knowledge graph and then have nodes and edges which which depict what exactly the node is about. And the whole reason they wanted to do this was because they are trying to create a very sustainable service architecture. They want to they actually have three challenges when engineers actually build applications and grow the architecture. They wanted to overcome the challenge of blindness, ignorance, and primitiveness. And this is something that comes in as part of how the architecture evolves and duplicating of functions in the code, and also about how to approach diagnostics and engineering observability in general. So they have put out a blueprint. It's available on the website, and the link is already over here. You can have a look at this later. And they talk about how they can actually address this, and they're addressing this already. They use Neo4j internally, and they've also open sourced a graph, knowledge graph, kind of a service called, I believe it's called, what was the name of that? Beam or something. I forgot the link. It's not there right now. But they've released it as an open source service or a tool available. So that's something you can have a look at if needed. But yeah, I mean, that's basically how it is. So with that, we're going to jump in directly to our first talk. And I can see it's already 8:20. So without further ado, we have Tong Sheng. So Tong is, I know Tong from before, basically, because we have worked together in a previous company. And he is currently a principal engineer at Cheetah Digital in CyberJaya. Having him as a first speaker as part of SARCCOM actually has a historical connection also, because we have worked together on architecture also in our previous company. The fact that he was able to architect a lot of the front end and take that learnings and experience onto his next company and then do that actually provides a much bigger context for this whole meetup and discussion. Because one of the things that I realized until I worked with him was architecture was usually just for the backend, right? The fact that anytime you talk about architecture, everyone thinks databases, they think about file systems, they think about computers and networking. And then you started seeing this whole front-end ecosystem grow, like basically explode, literally, right? From tool chains to how data is being shared across components within a front-end. So what I'm seeing is right now a convergence of sorts with the front-end on architecture and components in general. And you will see that as part of the trend talk, which you're going to have after Tong speaks. So with that, yeah, on to you, Tong. I can't hear you. You're muted. Just try.
Oh my God.
There you are.
All right. Thank you, Fast, for having me. It's good to be back. Okay, let me quickly share my screen. Okay, I got my slide here. Okay, first of all, thank you, Fast, for having me here today to give me a chance to justify for front end. Okay, so I'm going to talk about something called monorepo. So I want to give you the idea of how you are able to, manage all your front end application, or maybe even the back end together inside one repo. Right? We're talking about a Git repo. Okay, so I think I don't have to introduce myself. I think Fast is already spoke briefly just now. But of course, he mentioned that I do some front end architect. That's true, but I don't really like to address myself as an architect. I always address myself. I tell people that I'm more like a designer, right? I think architect is about all about solving the problem, right? So of course, I'm not here to tell you, give you advice on solution, right? Because I don't believe in that. I don't believe that you can have a solution without a problem, right? So I'm just here to share with you maybe some inspiration, right? Maybe some possibility that you can consider, in your future project, right? So today this talk is going to focus mainly on the using the JavaScript full stack. So we have React in the front end, we have TypeScript, we have React that write in TypeScript, and then we have the backend using Express.js. So I'll talk about what is the monorepo, and then why is it good to use, and then why you shouldn't use it, and then follow up with some example, right? Of course, I'm a front end guy, and I'm also big fans of monorepo. So bear with me. Maybe some of the information will be a little bit more biased because I'm a front end guy, right? Okay, so let me go with the first one. Okay, so just mentioned, right? Just now, you say a lot of when we talk about architecture, people always think about the back end. Of course, I agree with that. there's a lot of difficult problem to be solved in the back end. How do you serve millions of users? How do you deploy fast enough, serving thousands of what do you call the microservice? So of course, those are very great, good challenge, right, to solve. But of course, doesn't mean that front end do not have problem, right? It's true that the front end today there's a lot of good frameworks that able to let us build something really fast compared to last time, right? But in my opinion, for a front end guy, the challenge is not the challenge of front end today is not to think of how to build something, right? There's a lot of things that is already been built by other people. So the challenge for a front end guy is in fact is more on the UX side, right? When you roll out your product to the production, you roll out to the market, people use your product, they have some feedback, right? So when they have some feedback, how fast can you make the changes, right? How fast can you roll out these changes and then release that back to the user, to again get more of their feedback, right? How do you iterate fast enough? So in front end, it's always very challenging to think about how do we actually make the front end developer work faster, right? So we want to encourage them to change. We want to encourage. There's from my past experience, there's a lot of developers that are afraid of changes, right? Because once they change something, there's a lot of things breaking. There's a lot of things that need to go through. So when I try to think of how to solve this problem, I want to put this two main point as two of my important things to consider, right? So I want something that can empower change. I want something that can encourage people to collaborate more, right? So like I say, this is not a solution. This idea of monorepo might not be able to solve your problem, but nevertheless, let's explore as well. So yeah, so back to the empower change, right? So I want we want to create a front end that is someone that when the developer come in, they can start easily, right? They can have something that can just jump in and then start to work in without a minimum setup. We also want to make something that is very easy to make changes, right? When I say easy to changes, I'm talking about we are giving the confidence for the developer, right? We from the architecture, we actually allow the developer to have that confidence to actually make changes. They do not afraid of making changes because they know that the test case or their the linting able to help them to catch all this problem as fast as possible, right? From the build time, not just from during the runtime. Right, so we also want them to deploy fast enough, right, so that they can keep on making changes and improve the UI, right? So we also want to have something that we can easily spot problem, right? Like just now I mentioned, if you let's say you make a changes that break some other apps, do you are aware of that problem, and then you can actually fix it faster, before you release out. And of course, once if unfortunately you roll out something that is not correct, you can revert easily, right? So before we go to the monorepo, right, we have to look at the polyrepo, right? So polyrepo is good. Is again, I had to emphasize here, we're not talking about what is better, polyrepo or monorepo. We just say you should look at different kind of approach to think about what kind of solution is actually better for your company, right? You have to always understand what is the problem they're trying to solve. What kind of company structure, communication structure that you have in your company, how your different teams in your organization actually work together. So yeah, so polyrepo, right? Just quickly go through this. Polyrepo is basically one simple repo. Let's say you have one application, you have one Git repo, right? So polyrepo is good, right? It's small, it's simplified, it's very flexible. You can choose to. If you have a multiple repo in your company, you can choose to host them in different place. You can host them in GitHub, Bitbucket. Right, it's flexible. Okay, you can do whatever because all this code that you have is encapsulated inside one repo, right? And polyrepo is good also because you can have clear ownership of who is actually owning this repo. Like for example, I have the repo for the Express.js backend, right? So there's a team who own this. So they take care of this repo, they make changes, and then they have the team to actually review them and so on. Let's say you have front end, you have one application, and then you have few people who actually own this. So this is really good if you have a different team that actually have very clear ownership on a certain different application. But of course, polyrepo. Excuse me. So, but polyrepo also have the challenge, right? So because it's all in different repo, so it often might influence people to discourage people to actually collaborate more. But of course, this is my opinion, because you work in silo, right? So you do not have a clear context of what other teams is doing. So they might have problem, like for example, let's say duplication, right? You can have this team has already built this thing that you're not aware of, and then you have built another one. So it causes a lot of duplication. So of course, that's not efficient, right? When it comes to you want to set convention and then make everything consistent, there's going to be a challenge. Of course, the linting can be the convention can be hard to the standard can be hard to set because different repo might have evolved into different configuration. They might have different way of test, different way of build, and different way of to release. Right, depends on the company. Some they can manage it well, but there definitely some company that are not able to cope with all this challenge. Right, so. Okay, so this is how a typical polyrepo is going to look like, right? Let's think about the yellow color as, let's say, your React component library. Okay, so your company have their own design system. Wow, very nice design system, and there's a team actually make a React UI component, right? For that design system, right? So another team of red color. Let's say red color is an application. Let's say an application in the company. They want to use this company design system component. So the library team will actually publish this React component into let's say a npm repository, and then the red color team will actually install this library and then use it in their application. Well, this of course, this kind of approach is one good thing is very simplified, right? It's quite straightforward, but of course, this also have a challenge, right? Let's say they wanted to create something new, but of course they do not own they might be able to own the your color, but some company there's a dedicated team for that library team, right? So they might have a challenge because they need to request the yellow color team to actually create something, right? Of course, this is not like again emphasize. It's not happening in every company. Some company may be able to solve this problem, but some company they might have a structure like that. So they might need to request some library from B. So when B make the changes, I assume there's not only one red color team is using the library, right? There might be multiple applications. So once the team yellow actually release something, they might need to actually announce the release, and then every team have to actually think about whether they want to upgrade the version of the library or not. So this is not terrible idea, but of course it's really hard to keep all your company application consistent, right? Some team might not have the time to actually to make the upgrade, right? So they might have an outdated UI. So all this kind of challenge, right? Of course, it's a challenge. It's not a problem that not able to be solved. There's a lot of way you can solve it, but we're not going to highlight there. Okay, so monorepo, right? Simple is as opposed as polyrepo. You have one single repo for all your project inside there, right? So that's including the front end application. Let's say you have a chat application, right? That you have your library, right? You can have your generic React hook. You can have your UI component, right? Your button, your table, your form, right? You can also have, let's say, if you are also you also have a full stack backend, JavaScript backend, right? So you also can have your API sitting inside within this small repo. So you can see here. So all this repo, you can let's say you're also using TypeScript, right? You have a TypeScript interface. You are able to benefit from sharing the interface across, let's say, backend. So let's say backend API have the are using one of the interface. Let's say you have a login service that using the user interface, and then the application that you have can also use that interface. So every time you make changes on your TypeScript interface, it's going to be reflect to both your back end and front end. So you can actually make changes to update the both front end and back end code accordingly. So yeah. So in pretty simple terms, everything inside one single repo, right? So this is this is a typical monorepo, front end monorepo that you're looking at, right? So you might have multiple React application, right? Let's say you have two React application, you have two Angular application, right? So you have 4 applications that sit inside the same repo. So all this application, maybe they are sharing the TypeScript interface. Okay, let's say they have a certain type they are sharing. So they might also have some generic JavaScript library that you share around, maybe some kind of utilities tools to make calculation and so on. So okay, so both Angular and React app can also consume from the same React Express, not React, sorry, not JS Express backend, right? So this is roughly how it's going to look like, okay, in the monorepo. So there's I just quickly go through. Okay, so there are 3 types of monorepo that I know. So the first one is Colossal. So this is a Colossal monorepo is like those that being used in the big company like Google, right? So they have hundreds of applications that's sitting in one monorepo, right? So I'll share a little bit, right? Because you have hundreds of thousands of code sitting inside one repo. So it doesn't make sense for you to actually check out the whole repo and install in your computer. In fact, your computer might not be able to install, and it might take hours or maybe days to actually finish install everything in your computer, which doesn't make sense. So for this kind of scale of monorepo like Google, I could not tell the real one, but I have heard the rumors. How they manage it is they have actually if you want to make changes to Google, you actually have to make changes. You can make changes from a browser-based interface editor. When you make changes, everything actually happen in behind the scene, right? So, but of course, I'm not sure if it's that true or not. I just heard it from someone. Yeah. So they are able to allow you to actually make changes, and then get tested from hundreds of apps, because they do it from the server side. Okay, they do it from the cloud. Yeah, so this is another type of monorepo. This is project monorepo. This is typically seen like JavaScript library, like Babel is a good example. So we have Babel core, but Babel has a lot of library as well. I mean, a different library, they solve different problem. So every time Babel, let's say Babel core is actually update, because all the other plugin is actually dependent on Weber core, so it makes sense to actually test all those library plugin that actually depends on Weber core, and then all tested all together and release together. So this is so every time when Weber upgrade, you can see that you might need to upgrade multiple package because of this. Oh, sorry. So, the one that we are going to focus today is the micro platform monorepo. Okay, so like I mentioned, you have your application in the same repo, you have your API, you have your library, all inside one repo. So later on, I'll have an example to show you how they actually work together. Okay. So yeah. So good part about monorepo, right? You have everything in one place, right? Imagine a developer joining your company, right? All they need to do is just to check out one repo, run the yarn command, install everything, and that's it, right? They get to see all the project, right? What kind of project you have, what kind of library you have, and of course, they're able to see how all these things actually talk to each other. You know, what app is actually using what library, what kind of API they actually consume. So it's good to have everything here because you get all the full context of how all these components actually talk to each other, right? So yep. So when I say everything is together, I'm not just talking about the code, right? You will have all your common configuration, right? That this configuration are actually shared across all the component that you have, right? Let's say, for example, you have a unit test. You just need to, configure one time, and then you are able to test everything within the repo, right? So this is just some example, right? So a typical monorepo, you will have ESLint set up, right? ESLint configure to actually help you to check all the code, code, how the code quality and all those stuff. You can have a Cypress that actually one configuration that able to test for all your application. You might have a different for might have a formatter, right? Like Prettier, and you can have a standard or one JavaScript config for everything. So that's one of the good part of monorepo, right? You don't have to have the you don't have to set up all this thing, right, in all different projects, right? Imagine if you have polyrepo, you might need to set up repo 1, you have to set up all your ESLint, blah blah blah, and then repo 2 you have to do it. So it's good to have all the configuration, one configuration that applies to all your libraries and application. So yeah, so monorepo, just how I mentioned, right, where I want to empower change, right? So when you have a monorepo, you have, let's say you have a library, UI library shared by 2 different applications, right? So every time, let's say if you have a need to actually upgrade that button from the library, once you update the buttons, let's say you change the color, right? Automatically, right, those applications that actually consume this library will get updated, right? Let's say you make a changes on the library that actually break. So you as a developer, you are responsible to actually fix those breaking changes, right? So it makes your developer more responsible, right? They will be more careful when they try to change something, right? Because once they change, they have to make sure that all the apps that actually use that library are not that will not have a problem, right? Of course, if you are fully your repo is fully automated, this will be even better, right? So they can make changes and then they have that confidence that this doesn't break other application. So if let's say if your company have a branding update, you change one, you apply to all application. So you make your branding consistent, right? User will like it because everything is so familiar. You won't have. I'm sure you've seen some application where they have some page has look different and then another page might not have different design. So we don't want that for our front end. So yeah, so this is another example of how all these things talk together, right? So again, a typical app monorepo micro platform monorepo, like this one we talk about it. You might have your React app here, right? Let's say your React Native app. You might have your React web admin. So both of these applications actually using sharing the same design and component library. Okay, so it looks like that. So this app use button, this app also use button. So once you change this button, this will get reflected, this will get reflected as well. So you might also have, let's say, authentication service that being used by all service that actually used by client mobile and also web. So let's say if you update some your user interface, this green color is actually the interface, the TypeScript interface, and then once you update this interface here, you might need to update the service and as far as the app that actually using this interface, right? So the editor will actually throw error because they detected that the TypeScript actually detected you have a contract change, and then you need to upgrade this one in order to correct it. Okay, so another good thing about monorepo, right? Imagine you have polyrepo, you have a lot of repo, right? You want to, let's say you're, like I mentioned just now, you make a changes on the common library, right? Let's say there's 10 application is actually consuming this library. So once you make the library, all these 10 repo has to actually upgrade the version, right? You want to upgrade to the latest library. But if you are in the polyrepo, you might need extra work, right? You need to go to each of your project, actually update it, and then create a pull request, and then approve, and then only you can deploy, right? It's not terrible idea, but that's extra work. But compared to polyrepo, in monorepo, you change a button, all the app get reflected, and then we run all the unit tests, E2E, everything pass, one PR, and then you are good to deploy. So this is something very useful, in my opinion. Yeah, so one repo, so you can have one single release process. Okay, you can, even though you're only making changes on one of your application, you push the code, you are able to trigger the build process, and then just build that one application that you want to release, and then that's it. And all this thing, this release is going to be, you can run all your linting tests or in one process, so you don't need to have multiple CI/CD job to actually make your deployment. Of course, good and bad, right? I'll briefly talk about it this later, right? So yeah, so this is a thing that I really want to highlight, right? Or when I spoke to a lot of people, talk about how they want to design their architecture. What I often heard is they always talk about problem solving, yeah, which is good, which is important. They always talk about the technology they use, what kind of technology to use. But for me, it is also very important to look at how our design, right, how our architecture design can actually shape your team culture, right? So as earlier I mentioned, right, if you have this kind of a design where everybody are actually responsible for all the components, right? First of all, they'll be more careful, right? So they will be, if they want to make changes, they have to make sure everything, because they own everything. So monorepo is not for everyone, right? Like I say, if you have a very dedicated team to actually manage a project, right, own the project in a very dedicated way, this might not work for you, right? But if you have a medium-sized team, you want everybody to dare to make changes, right? Do not afraid to make changes, to have that kind of confidence. So in some way, if you have that kind of architecture, I believe it will actually change the way your team actually work together, right? Yeah. So of course, this is not for everyone. So share why do you shouldn't use this, right? So for my past experience, I feel that it might be challenging, right? at the beginning, when you try to set up a monorepo, it's very challenging for you to actually set up the CI/CD. So if you have different team that might have different way of working and blah blah, blah and so on, you might have a challenge, right? How do you have one repo and then deploy to multiple different places, EC2, Lambda, S3, and all those things. So you might need to work with your DevOps team on this one. So so it can be very challenging because it might be very different from what they are currently doing. Okay, so and it not just from the beginning. When you start to scale big, there's a lot of changes, right? For example, if you have 100 now, you scale to 50 application, so your tests will be going to be slow. But if you're going to test application, so how do you solve that? You need to be able to have a way you can detect, okay, what kind of application is affected in this release, in this pull request, so that my test can actually run tests against these two impacted application instead of running the whole the whole repo. That might going to take hours. So you do want that. You want to deploy something fast. So that's the thing that you're going to think. But of course, the example that I'm going to show later is going to show you all that, because there's a good library that I like to use that actually solve that problem for you. Okay, so yeah, so this is a thing that you have to consider. Yeah, so a second thing, of course, your organization is not ready. Like I say, you might have a company that already have a fixed structure, current structure, that actually develop multiple app in monorepo. So they have maybe there's one team that own two app, another team own another app. So if you want to have this kind of architecture, first of all, you have to solve how do you actually bring everybody together and then start to using this architecture. So this is definitely going to be one big challenge, right? You're not able to, if you're not able to move everybody to this monorepo if you are not able to change the team structure, right? So second thing is you might this is also not good for those companies that already have a lot of application running, right? So monorepo, for my opinion, is good to start fresh, right? If you want to have a new project, you can try. But if you already have a lot of multiple application, it's very difficult for you to actually combine them and then combine them and then manage in a monorepo. That is actually equal to redo everything, right? So like I say, it's good to start fresh. But if your company is already established, they already have a product that is running for for years, this might not be suitable for you. Last one, I think I actually reused this slide. So this is for last time. I think now a lot of library out there that is good that you can look at, and there's a lot of adoption also, like you can see, especially on the front end, right? So not much of the big issue, but of course, definitely it's going to be challenging to find information about how you release, how you blah blah blah, and so on. Yeah. So the last one will be cross-team collaboration. If you have actually this is the same point as the previous one. If you have two different teams, want to actually use one library, so it's kind of hard, right? Like team A actually working on application A, team B use application B. Both of these teams actually have to also managing the library, so it makes it makes it hard to use monorepo. If you are in team A that own the library, team B actually have to come to you to ask for changes, so all this thing. So unless you're able to convince the organization to actually bring the teams together to work on this monorepo, it doesn't make sense for you to move to monorepo, I think, in my opinion. So I think this is the end of my talk. So the next will be I want to show some example, right? So so this is a typical. This is the structure, the layer that I use for my organization, right? So I have a React monorepo. So like I mentioned just now, in this repo we have a foundation layer, so which is all our common configuration, So we have a one global unit test configuration with our quality gate like SonarCube and also ESLint, with our documentation, which is a popular library called Storybook. If you work on React, you know this library. And all this application and library share the same dependencies, share the same configuration. We have some kind of automation going on in our repo, where you can have one command to actually invoke build for everything, and as well as E2E. And we also share one mock server in our repo, so that when the backend is not ready, we can use this mock server to actually build front end. So in the React part, right, we have a 3-layer, right? So you might have a most smallest pieces of your items, which is the presentational component. We call it presentation component in React. So basically means the most primitive element, like button, table, maybe a card, and all those things, right? That without any state. You also have your static asset that you share across, right? Let's say you have one icon or logo that you can share with all your application. You also have some utilities sitting in the lowest level of your shareable items, like mathematic utilities and all those stuff. The next layer on top will be we call it container component. So container component usually contains a state, right? So this container component is also usually talk to some kind of service, right? When you mount your component, this component we're going to trigger the API call, and then once the API call returns something, you display something. So container component is a combination of multiple different asset utilities and presentation component. And then the next the final layer will be the wrapper. I call it the wrapper layer. Some of my colleagues, they call it the composition layer. So you are using a React component, right? So you can actually wrap this React component in different wrapper. For example, you have a login widget, right? You have login widget that is shared by 3 different applications. So let's say application A is running on React single page application. So you can have a single page application wrapper that actually import this thing and build it as a single page application. You might be also want to, let's say you have a different you have actually built some component, you want to share it to your other team that is not using React. So you might want to build and compile them into something more generic, more framework agnostic. So you might choosing web component actually wrap your login widget, right? So I'm not sure whether it's possible, but potentially you can have other wrapper. I'm not sure, maybe mobile, blah blah blah, and so on, right? So these are an example of how it's going to look like from different layer, right, in your monorepo. Sorry. So next is an example, right? So think about that. If your company have a legacy UI, they might actually want to upgrade some of their module, let's say the search application or login application. So this will going to be one application in your monorepo. This is another same application that sit inside your monorepo. Both of these apps, let's say they have using a button icon, so they share the same icon, but they built into 2 different apps and deploy to a different location. Okay. So this is another example of So in your monorepo, like just now I mentioned, they say if you want to make a full stack, you might have different API. So in this example, you can see you can have one GraphQL API as a gateway. So you can have all your microservice GraphQL. Let's say you have a GraphQL microservice that talk to Elasticsearch. You might have a GraphQL that talk to Cloud Identity, which is your authentication. So 3 of these microservices can actually be combined together in this gateway using the remote join. One very good, nice feature from GraphQL. So you might also have some, microservice that actually talk to the legacy controller and so on. So this is just another example. So all these microservices can be inside one same repo. Okay. So this is also another example on how your CDI/CD is going to look like. So once you create a pull request, so your pull request got approved and then merge into master. So let's say if you're using Jenkins, so there will be they'll start to trigger the build process. Okay, so you can run your linting to make sure all the quality is passed. You can run your unit test. Let's say you want to you have a test server, right? You can run unit test E2E. After everything is passed, then you can invoke build, right? So you start to build, and then finally after you build, you got the final artifact, which is HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and then you can also and then start your deployment to multiple places. Like for example, React app, you can actually host in S3, right? You can have 3 applications, you can host in 3 different S3. So you might have your different microservices that you want to host in Lambda, that you can deploy to multiple Lambda. So I hope this gives you a good picture on if you have a multi-repo, how the build process, CI/CD process is going to look like. So, hey, Fast, do we have Q&A for this? Hey, where's Fast? Okay, that's fine. I'll just go straight away to the demo.
Yeah, we have 2 questions already being
awesome.
asked over here.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's go with the questions, and then we'll see if we can do the demo quickly. So the first one is on recommended tools with monorepo, or do you need to build it yourself? Because different teams in different organizations would do it differently, and how they use monorepo.
Okay, the most common one is I would say is the Yarn workspace, right? So if you decide to build from scratch, you can use Yarn workspace, right? That is the most simple way, most straightforward way. So you can have one JavaScript project, one package.json, and then multiple packages. And then these packages talk to each other. This is the most simple way. If you want to also manage your, let's say, versioning, you can try to combine Yarn workspace with Lerna, right? So, but if you are someone who just want to start something quick, I don't want to set up all these things. To be honest, I set up everything myself. I think it's painful, right? Especially when you want to, like I mentioned just now, you want to do change detection, right? You don't want to test everything. You want to test only 1-2 application is impacted on this release. So you actually need to manually do your, find a way so you can compare, let's say, your Git head with the master, head from your pull request to your master, and then detect what is the application impacted, and then this application actually consume what kind of library, and then what library actually impacted what other library. So I'll show in the example later. So it's painful, right? I don't recommend that, but if you there's a specific need that you need to customize everything, of course you have to start. But later on the demo, I'm going to show you one library, right, that actually solve all this problem for you already. So you can just start the project and then let them worry about all these other things that I just mentioned just now. Okay,
cool.
Yeah.
So let's do the demo, and then we'll come back to the second question as a closing. Yeah.
Okay,
so
cool.
Just to add you back. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this example is very simple. Okay, I have one app, like a demo app here, right? So I also have one admin app. So both of these apps actually share one common library, right? So these are different apps that you can deploy in different places. Okay, you can deploy to S3, one bucket of S3, is another. So both of these apps we actually share this thumbnail library. Okay, so they are using the same one. It's just different styling. So let's say refresh, you see the changes. Yeah. So okay. So this one, we are doing nothing. We just show a list. Okay. So when I say sharing, what does it mean? Okay. Let's go back to the code. So this is the. Okay. Let me close this first. Distraction. Okay. So I'm using one library. called NX. Okay, you can, let me just open the page so that you can, oops. So let's do check out this, right? So this is the framework, you know, to set up the monorepo for you, that actually come out of the box with Cypress, Jest, TypeScript, Prettier, everything is all together, right? So by default is TypeScript, but if there's an option for you to choose pure JavaScript, you can also have the Node.js backend Express. So you can go through this one. Later we will share this link. This is very good, very simple, right? 10 minutes, you're able to set up everything. Okay, so you have your application. So let me go through the application here. So you have your app folder, which is all your application. You have your backend. Okay, so this is the backend that I have. So just now that you see, I have a simple API, Express API, that actually call some random API that get one person, and then I have a API to get multiple user, right? With the result 10. So both of these application is here. So you have a SARCCOM demo app admin. You also have your demo app. Okay, so both of these application actually consume the shareable library. Let's say in this case, we have our UI library. So in this UI library, some example, right? You have your button, card, you know, all this kind of thing that you share. So both of these sample application here share those all this library. But of course, when I talk like that, it's very hard to visualize. So this tools has a very nice feature, right? Where you can actually take a look at all your, I'm not sure where's the comment. Sorry, let me check. Okay, so you are able to visualize all your dependency, right, from this. So this is one of their feature, which is really good. I really like this. So you can have you can able to see, right? So these are all the applications that I have inside that repo. So you're able to, it's messy, but you can able to see how all these component and application link to each other, right? So we give one example. You can actually focus on this thing and see. So like I mentioned just now, I share a same API interface, right? So I have a TypeScript interface. This TypeScript interface is being used by the API, right? So this API, this TypeScript interface is just shared by the API as well as your front end. So every time you upgrade your interface here, so all these four will throw error, right? So you will need to fix them. Let's say you add a new field called name. So this here you need to add name, right? So this is very handy, right? Like I mentioned, you encourage people to change, right? I want to improve my software. I want to add feature. I want to refactor it. So when you change it, you have that confidence, because you will throw error, right? You cannot pass your build process because TypeScript actually throw error. So yeah. So again, so another example, right? Use seeing the demo app just now. Okay. So this demo app, so this demo app, you are using the interface. You also use the generic UI. You also use the two different kind of service, right? So if you go to this UI, you are able to see, oh, okay, this UI is being used by what app. Okay, so this is an example. So now I want to show you another example, right? On what does it mean impact? That's how I keep mentioning impacted item. So what does it mean impacted? Okay, so
Hey, Tong, could you just zoom in on VS Code because it's kind of small?
Okay, sure. Better?
Oh, yeah, better. Thanks.
Yeah. So this out of the box, you're able. There's a feature, very nice feature, where you can actually detect what is the impacted application. So let's give an example. So we have the let's say thumb, right? So we want to make changes in the thumb. So we want to, let's say, add another option. Okay, let's make okay, let's let's maybe just boot a console, okay? So when you save, okay, you can see that this, okay, the changes is here. So now let's see what is the impacted. Sorry, I have to refer. So, okay, this is the one. Oops. Okay, so you see here. So the red color means that you change, because you're changing a button. So 3 of this application is using this library, right? Of course, one of the downside, because I put all the UI inside here, right? So you see, even though maybe this app doesn't use button, but it still become red color. Let's see the overall picture, right? So the framework, right? This framework is very good, able to detect. Let's say you change this UI, so they will tell that this application is impacted. So this application impacted. So you do not need to run unit tests in all the other thing, like all this service that is not being impacted, right? So you don't have to run E2E. So you save a lot of time, right? Let's say if you only make a small changes, let's say let me try this service, okay? So let's revert these changes. So have a get. Let's say I also make the changes here. Stop it, run. So you see here? Yeah. So this is what I mentioned, right? You only impact one area. So you will only need to run your test against this one without running all tests for everything, which is really handy. So this is a really nice handy features that this library have to offer lah. So I recommend, if you want to start something quickly, you can take a look at this. Of course, the thing that you need to consider is, once you install this, you have to think about how your CI/CD is going to look like, how you're going to deploy, because it might be different from what you used to do, right? So you might need to configure a little bit and then figure out if you want to deploy your Lambda using serverless framework. How do you do it? How do you install here? If you want to host your, let's say, your front end React application in Firebase hosting, how do you want to do it? So there's might be some challenge there that you need to think about. But of course, this library is already helping to solve a lot of problems. So yeah, so I kind of recommend this framework lah. So take a look at this one. So I think that's it for the demo. Okay. Back to the question. Is there any question?
Sorry, I was on mute. So the next one is on what is the pain point based on your experience when you try to scale a large React application, and how you dealt with it.
What is the pain point? Do you mean my past experience? Okay, I'll tell you my past experience. Okay, because I set up everything from scratch. So the pain point, of course, first thing is the build process, right? So how do I build? How do I talk to the DevOps people? How do they want to build my? I have to communicate with them. Second, once my application grow, the editor becomes slower, right? Because you have multiple app running. When you start your local host, there's so many things inside there, it start to become slow. So you need to like this what the NX is provide. You need to be able to only start what you need. So that you need to configure. So you need to think about how do you do that, right? So the pain point also be if you do not have things like TypeScript, right? So you want to make changes. You are making one changes when, if you do not aware of what app is actually using that, you will be screw up right? Because let's say you add something and you break the existing behavior. If you do not have good, high coverage of your unit test, if you do not have high coverage of E2E, if you do not have things like TypeScript to help you to catch all this, human error, you might get into trouble. Maybe, for example, if you remove some of the field, right, that this application is actually using. But the build process is going to tell you, because pure JavaScript, they are not going to catch the build time error, right? So you will end up having error when you release out, when you will actually have the runtime error. So the challenge is you need to have all this kind of protection layer to inside your monorepo. If you do not have that, you shouldn't use monorepo. You'll be crazy. Change one thing, impact all, then good luck. Yeah. So those are the biggest pain point. So yeah.
Okay, cool. That's interesting to know that static typing actually aids monorepos, and if you're not doing that, then it becomes more painful. Okay.
Yeah.
So last question is more on curiosity on monorepo with a micro front end. Will it add more complexity or fair trade-off with flexibility?
Okay, that's a good question. So when I start to join Cheetah, right? When I start to join Cheetah, Cheetah have one. My company has one legacy application is running running on the monolith .NET monolith. All the UI, all the backend, it's all inside one big monolith project, right? So when I joined the company, right, I was told you are not allowed, right? So you're not allowed to revamp everything. We do not have that leisure for you to revamp everything. So if you want to innovate, right, you have to replace some of the module bit by bit. So I guess that's one good use case for micro front end, right? So you have your let's say in my company case, we actually create a new search bar. It's just a simple search bar, just one search bar, right? It's not a React application, it's just one React search component, right? So this React search component is not just being used in legacy, it's also being used in our new application. So I think this kind of micro front end approach, right, with monorepo makes my life easier, right? Because I have multiple apps that share in different platform, share in different site, different like .NET, even in React and other. I also share this search bar to a team that using Ruby on Rails with JavaScript, right? Pure JavaScript. So with monorepo, I'm able to build just one input box that actually have the branding, styling, that's consistent with other application as well. So I think using this monorepo really help in micro front end, because you are not limited to just build in one area. You can actually have one repo, share the resources, but build in different area. So this is really handy. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I answered the question well enough.
Okay, cool. I mean, it definitely sounds like it's kind of like doing a trade-off exercise, right? Trying to understand, okay, fitting up, because a micro front end as a concept has been catching on in mainstream development for quite some time. There are big companies who have been doing that for many years, right? We heard about Spotify and Amazon and all in our earlier days when we used to see how they used to do these things. They used to create self-contained components, as they called it. So seeing that now translated into mainstream makes sense. But I mean, it's definitely going to be a case-by-case kind of a thing. In the case which you're mentioning with the monorepo, it kind of does make sense, because it gives you that common source of truth for components, right? That's kind of like what you're going at with monorepo. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of it with these questions. Thanks, Tong. Thanks a lot for giving this talk. I think it's a pretty interesting insight to actually see how even a lot of the concepts from the back end is influencing the front end, right? It's not only about even architecture. Like you just mentioned about TypeScript, and even mentioning about the static typing and how it's actually helping the front end, because you're able to catch errors during compile time versus during runtime. I mean, a lot of these things have been sitting in the back end for quite some time, but it took effort and even time over years for it to translate into the front end and make it a much more richer development experience. I would say in this case. So yeah, thanks for sharing on that. So quickly, for whoever is around, I just wanted to run a poll. I think we have a crowd already. So the idea is that just to understand who all are joining in right now and watching this. So just do join in on Slido and then go on to this number. Just wanted to see, we have two questions. It's pretty simple. Just the idea is that if any of you are in software architecture or any kind of architect, what exactly are you doing? Whether you're a software or solutions architect and you don't believe in the architect role. So just key it in and we'll just have a look just to give us an idea of what's the kind of crowd we're catering to. 0 doesn't look good, so at least I want to see at least one person put in something over here. At least. I'm not sure. I'm assuming this is supposed to be real time, so it's supposed to. Let me see. I just confirm if it's real time. And then go 4476. 44766. All right, perfect. So it does work. So yeah, I guess the crowd is either shy or whatever. Okay, this is good. Thanks. Just wait for a couple more to come in, and then I'll move to the next poll. I won't be surprised. Let's put it that way. If nobody actually selects enterprise architect, because my talk is going to cover on that a little bit. Also, so just 5. I see. We have more than 10 people over here. Just to wait a bit more. I like the person who's saying I don't believe in the architect role. That's good. I would say that's where I was a couple of years ago before I became an architect myself. And I don't have the trends with me today. Maybe in the next meetup, I'll just share some of the trends that I've been seeing in the architecture realm over the last 5 to 10 years. Cool. All right. In interest of time, thanks. Whoever contributed to the poll, appreciate it. At least you can get an understanding that there are a couple of people who don't believe in the architect role, which is kind of cool. Which I'm assuming then you also must be doing your own DevOps. I'm guessing that question's not there, but yeah. So yeah, thanks for that. So this gives a fair idea that we are talking to folks who understand what is architecture, who understand even from a role perspective. Whether you're having the job title or not is irrelevant. It's more about understanding whether you're playing that role, right, versus a job title as such. Cool. So I'll just go into the next one then quickly. And this is more like you'll have to type out something at least. So please do provide your suggestion. I just want to understand what are the kind of topics you want to see covered in future sessions. It doesn't matter where you're from because I can see we have a lot of folks who are tuning in from. We have folks who are tuning in from Bandung. Geraldi, thank you so much for joining in and supporting the chapter over here. And then we have Freddie and Boyung also from Jakarta who are joining us over here right now. So definitely this, even though we started this as a chapter in Malaysia, it is virtual, which basically means anyone around the globe around this time when they can attend this can. So if there's topics which you're interested in, do chime in and just put it over here. We also have Fahmi also who's put in. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate your support in joining in. And then we have someone from Engineers Mai also. We have Chiryong over here. Thanks, Chiryong. Appreciate the support. The fact that you're able to get StreamYard and use all this. Appreciate that. So yeah, do put in some sessions if there is something over here. I'll wait, or else I'm just going to type it myself. Okay, my microservices, all right. And Freddie says enterprise architect is a different beast. I totally agree with that. I kind of lean towards the definition of ivory towers and graybeards. If anyone knows the reference, enterprise architect is using EAP and TOGAF. Yep, fair point. domain-driven design, managing large-scale microservices. All right, cool. I mean, I'm sure there are others, and I'm guessing some of you are mobile shy, even though you don't have to show your face over here. Maybe next time you may actually provide more input. This is good. I think this is something we can start with, large-scale microservices and domain-driven design. Thanks for that. Let me see if I can just quickly move to showing there's an option to show the results. Again, maybe, no. Oh, okay. Hide results, show results. All right, fair enough. Cool. So thanks, Tong. Appreciate it. I'll just move you off the stream right now. And
Thank you.
then I'll jump into my session. Yeah, thanks. And I am just mindful of time. The fact that, okay, we took actually an hour for this, but it was a pretty interesting session because there's a lot of stuff that the front end space, as a lot of folks know over here, has been growing at a very rapid speed, an explosion, literally. And there are things which I miss out, even if I don't tune in the first 1 or 2 months. And it's been a few months since I've even interacted with the front-end developer. The fact that I'm talking to Tong right now and I'm seeing, okay, all this stuff has happened in the last 1 year is insane. So that's kind of like where it is going to in this case. So as part of my talk today, wow, that's more topics straight to the workshop. That's interesting. As part of today's talk, I'm going to touch on the state of the union, understand where software architecture is in 2020, and we will cover a couple of things. I'll try to move through the slides faster. I know it's a virtual session, so you all have a choice to just switch off, and then I'll be just talking to myself. But I still don't want to take too much of your time also. So in this case, I'm just going to quickly jump into where we are at with the software architecture, right? So to start with, hey everyone, I'm Fuzz. And I've been 16 years in the industry in IT. I've been in Malaysia for almost 5 years right now. And I work with different kinds of companies. I work with large corporations, SMEs, and startups. And you can see the chronology from the top to the bottom. So I started with a company which a lot of people over here would already know, Huawei basically. And then I worked in the disaster recovery space for some time. Then I was in Dubai for a couple of years, where I did projects, consulting capacity with companies like Etisalat, which is a telecom company, and then banks. Joined Malaysia almost 5 years ago. Joined a company called Randstad, which is a multinational firm in HR and recruitment globally. That's where me and Tong worked together, and we had a blast doing a lot of stuff over there. One of these days, maybe that's a story that may come out in the sharing in some community. And I joined AWS, Amazon Web Services, last year. In fact, I just completed a year this week, and it's been a roller coaster ride. And it's been interesting because from an architect perspective, I have done. To reach this point itself, I have done a lot of roles along the way. So I started with enterprise development. I started as a Java developer, and you'll kind of see that as part of one of the slides over here. And over the years, I noticed that it's not only about development, you also need to manage infrastructure and automation. And this is before even the whole concept of DevOps came in, right? The fact that a lot of development I learned practices, whether good or bad, I learned it from Huawei. And the fact that if you build something, you're responsible to fix it. I kind of learned that early on in my career. DevOps as a concept came in later, even though it was just a rebranding and a repackaging of what we had done. And over the years, I started evolving more towards the architecture side of things. The fact that instead of just being in the trenches and then working on the code, trying to understand how what I'm building connects with other parts and other services around, right? Whether in your enterprise or whether outside. That's especially something that came into being when I was consulting back in Dubai, because I had to integrate with other systems as a system integrator. And you'll kind of see that also as part of today's session. And also over the years, I graduated towards building teams. So in a nutshell, I still code in some capacity, even though it's less. I do a lot of architecture, do a lot of whiteboarding with customers, talk about best practices, talk about understanding how they're integrating with certain services. And also along the way, picked up this whole segment of building engineering teams, building engineering excellence, best practices, so that you can repeat performances, right? The fact that you can actually build a team and then do certain things with the teams to execute and achieve outcomes, and that's something that fascinates me a lot. So in SARCCOM as such, if that's a topic that keeps coming up once in a while as a request, I'm definitely going to touch on building teams and building engineering teams and building best practices from an architecture and even from a team and personal perspective. So do expect more of that to come soon. Right. So I just wanted to start with going back in time a bit, right? Try to understand where we're coming from, because software architecture has evolved over the years. The fact that architecture as a concept was tied into civil engineering and construction as such. I'll quickly jump directly into how I started into the whole IT industry, right? And when I started, this was the norm, right? We had floppy disks, literally, right? I started with the bigger disks on the left side, and then afterwards, gradually, it became smaller and smaller. By the time I finished uni, and I was getting into the workforce, I remembered at that time that we still used to install things over disks and CDs. CDs were more expensive, but these things were prone to corruption. Magnetic disks, you put it near a fridge or near a water cooler, and it will just data disappears. And surprisingly, still companies at that time in the early 2000s still used to deploy things over disks and CDs for whatever reason, whether it's cost of medium or other things. But eventually, over the years, we started moving towards USB disks, right? And you will be surprised. I'm not sure if people have seen this with customers right now, but until 2015, when I was working with one of the banks, as a consultant, they used to do deployments over USB disks. They believed that it was still more efficient to do this versus it having a code artifact or any kind of a repository or something internally within the bank itself. And we're talking about a big bank in the UAE, in the United Arab Emirates, back in the Middle East. So yeah, I mean, 2015 isn't that far; it's just 5 years ago, right? So that's kind of like where we were from a storage and a delivery perspective of software. And this is how racks were built in those days and still are. Just that now you don't have to touch a rack to actually build and deploy anything. And it always start with, when you do an installation for a new rack, the first time you do it beautifully, right? This is how you would actually build it out really well. And over the years, in fact, the months, when you start swapping things in and out and fixing things, this is what it becomes in the end, right? And I've also been in a data center and worked in places where you would have the Swiss cheese of architecture, the Swiss cheese of infrastructure as such, where you have lines all over. This is basically a depiction of what I have faced. It's not a real photo from a DC because they didn't allow us to take photos at that time. But yeah, I mean, that's where I'm coming from in terms of architecture as such. So trying to tie this back into over the years how things have changed, and if you take this whole concept, and I've taken the liberty of taking some of these community images over here. I didn't put the references when I update the slides and give it across. You'll definitely find the references from where I got this. The fact that we started with binary languages in general, right? So 0 and 1, that's the basic language. You would actually start with punch cards, and then you would try to understand what you're actually putting in a punch card. And then eventually that got translated into a higher level language. So you started getting compiled languages. Then you started going towards distributed programming and having runtimes so that you have code that is executed on runtimes. And then the internet happened in the 90s, which basically changed everything that we did. And over the years after the internet blew up and exploded and has permeated almost every part of our life, we started seeing changes even in the databases which we use. I come from a time where I thought a database is the only way to store application data. That's how we were taught in uni in the 2000s, right? And we thought, okay, SQL and relational database is the only way. The fact that when NoSQL came in, it was a mind-blowing experience for me. And then the whole thing that, the data doesn't have to have a structure, it doesn't have to have schema. And that's something maybe we can go into some other day and talk about the differences between RDBMS and NoSQL. And then the cloud happened. Over the years, under the hood, the cloud has been happening, right? For example, 2006 is when AWS announced their first service out there for the cloud, and then slowly started building this whole cloud platform where you had different services which you can just connect and configure together, and then pump data through and then do processing over it. The cloud happened and enabled this whole massive ecosystem of applications and services to come by. And surprisingly, a lot of the applications we use right now run on the cloud in whichever way you want. Apps as a concept happened. The fact that you could have mobile applications separately started with even much before the iPhone, but then the iPhone made it mainstream. And then we started coming towards DevOps, the whole concept of having developers in operation. So if you notice, a lot of these things which are listed in this diagram, what resonated with me in this diagram is that these are things that shifted a certain thing in the way we do stuff, right, every day. These are things that actually shifted the way we approach, the way we solve problems, even the way we organize our teams. And I wouldn't be touching on team structure and organization today, but I definitely want to allude to the fact of Conway's law, which a lot of people over here, if they're in the microservices world, would have heard of. The fact that you could take the output of a team, and then from the way the architecture of that application is built, you could decipher the whole team structure and the communication that happens between the teams. Basically, that's something that came from the 60s. Very interesting concept over there. Now, when you actually map this against languages and frameworks and libraries and protocols, this is what it will look like. The fact that ones and zeros was assembly, and then from compiled languages, which was procedural, and OOPS languages or object-oriented, we started going towards client-server N-tier architecture. I entered the industry with N-tier. That's where basically we had 2-tier and 3-tier architectures being built. I started with enterprise Java. So I believe this was before even Java 1.4. Before Java 1.4. And I worked until Java 1.6 apparently, till 2015. Don't ask why. When I worked with customers, a lot of them were still stuck on 1.4 even in 2015, which is kind of strange, even though Java 8 had already come by then. And I never got to the point where I could actually learn the latest and greatest in Java. Then I shifted to another language. That's a different story altogether. Then we started getting this concept of runtimes, because we wanted portability, the fact that you wanted to actually have your code run on different machine architectures, and that's where the runtime would come in. And then you started seeing the rise of dynamic languages like JavaScript, and now you have more languages. Virtualization, containers also became a norm. For folks who don't know, containers and containers as a concept has been there since the 70s in Unix, and you would see that becoming mainstream when Docker came in and then packaged it very nicely and made it a much better experience. Virtualization as a concept started in the 2000s, early 2000s, and from there the internet came in and then changed a lot of things, the way we communicate between applications and services. You started seeing this growth between from SOAP or Corba protocols, if people remember Corba still, all the way to REST and microservices kind of approach to architecture. So you have service-oriented architecture in the middle that happened, which is still now coming back in vogue in a different name. We call it macroservices, thanks to Uber. And then we started seeing this whole explosion in databases. The fact that you could have, you could store different kinds of data within a database, whether it's a document or a graph, and the fact that you have purpose-built databases, so you can actually work on a polyglot of databases. The time in the old days, it used to be that I only have a MS SQL or an Oracle database, and I need to fit my data inside this database, no matter what. So we would create all these horrific, and I call it horrific because it was relations and normalizations between all these tables, and then try to do these massive joins, and then still try to make it faster, which never made sense. The fact that now we have a choice, and the fact that any application you build will be a polyglot of databases under the hood, makes it much more easier, even though it brings another set of challenges, the fact that you have more moving parts. But that's something we can actually cater to. Then the cloud happened, which enabled you to scale infrastructure at such a level that you could go global in minutes. You don't have to spin up a data center if you need to in any country. You could just go in, and then if you're using AWS or Google or even Azure, you could just go in and then create a server, a virtual machine somewhere, and then deploy your application, put a database, and you're done. Apps allowed to have a more richer and a more personal experience with users. The fact on your mobile phone, every one of us uses one. And DevOps as a concept came in. You started seeing automation, continuous delivery, infrastructure as code as a concept. And there's more after this, but this kind of in a nutshell gives you an idea of what it is we are doing. This is another aspect I usually put for people on computing as general, and how it ties back into project delivery and team structure. So we started a lot of folks over here. Maybe you've been in the waterfall process from before. When I was, waterfall was the norm. Agile had just started in a small section, maybe in some town somewhere in the US. And waterfall as a concept came about in development process, which then translated into agile, and then it became DevOps. We can have a talk just on agile versus DevOps, whether they're common, whether they're different, are they at loggerheads at each other. But in a way, for me, I see that they're corollary. They're kind of like they work together when you want them to work together. But sometimes people try to make them as a separate process between each other. Application architecture evolved definitely because of all of this. The way we deployed and packaged our applications changed from a physical server all the way to virtual to containers, and even the infrastructure which we used to deploy on changed. And you could see that this wasn't something that was planned, right? A lot of these things happened because of a certain change. It could be because of customer need. It could be because the hardware became better. It could. Nowadays we talk about Moore's law not being applicable anymore. The fact that you don't have to scale vertically more, you can actually scale horizontally, which is one of the allures of microservices. The fact that I can just scale vertically and handle more load if needed. So that's kind of like how it has been. Things have changed over the years and it has evolved, which basically means that even your architecture over the years would have changed. And your architecture, the way you build your applications, has never been in a silo. It's always affected by different factors. It could be with the language which you're using. It could be even the hardware you're using. It could also be the way your services communicate with each other, right? What protocols you use and how the services transfer data. Do they compress the data? Do they even secure the data if needed? So this is a very nice approach. I found out the link is already there by Khalil. He took the OSI model, or the networking OSI model, and then he built the whole thing for software design and architecture. I would suggest you to have a look at this link. It's pretty awesome. It talks about the scope which you would want to cover and how the foundations below build up the experience for the next level up. So he comes from the aspect of an architect being someone who starts by coding, right? And we'll see that over the years, I mean, my view on this has changed a bit. If you ask me right now, is it required for me to be a developer to be an architect? I would say it's not required. However, being a developer, if you were able to instill best practices while writing code, modularizing the code, understanding how to break up things together, and then write clean interfaces, then it'll definitely help you to build better services and even architect them. But that doesn't mean that you need to be a coder to become an architect as such. But the approach he does, I like it a lot, because you're talking about starting with how you actually name your functions and variables, and then you go upwards, right? You start looking at programming paradigms, and then you looked at object-oriented programming or functional programming, whichever is your flavor right now. And then you start, and then slowly you start abstracting away from the technology, and then you start going more towards patterns, and then you start going more towards a structure of some sort, or a framework, or even a heuristic, right? So in this case, you start moving towards principles and patterns, and then you start going to architectural patterns, and then enterprise patterns. And I mean, different people map it in different ways. A lot of times what happens is that when you start as a developer, over here at Clean Code, you also have to learn about enterprise patterns, because you would have an architect sitting on top somewhere, which is the enterprise architect we spoke of right now over here. Who would say, okay, this is how you have to write the code, because you need to make it, compatible, I would say. A lot of that, in my view, has changed a bit right now. But you would see this conversation happening again when you talk about domain-driven design and other things. And that's something I hope we cover in future sessions also. In this case, so that's basically how I would want to start with on terms of architecture and how you would want to look at it. You may fall in any part of the spectrum, right? I have kind of like come across all of this in my career, but not in the same sequence. It actually, like I said, right, enterprise patterns and clean code actually came in the beginning for me with programming paradigm, and then I slowly started moving into other things. Your mileage may vary in that case, but this is useful as a mental model to actually learn if you want to improve on architecture. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into some observations I've had over the years with my career, and where we're going to go from here from 2020. And a bit of a caution, this is basically anecdotal and experience. If you want to quote me on this, you can go ahead and quote me, but I'm just going to say it's my personal view. And if you want to fight me, yeah, totally, we can have a discussion later also on this. Not a problem. I would definitely want to say that it's good to at least have a view of what the future is, so that you know where to focus on and how to do certain things. So we'll start with infrastructure, right? And infrastructure has has been interesting over the years. The cloud became the norm. It was a raging thing. Any startup, any new company was doing something, they would move to the cloud. And the last year, 2019, has been an interesting year for cloud vendors, because now it's like every new company by default moves to the cloud. And and what would happen is, now we are starting to see governments and sensitive industries also adopting the cloud a lot, but they have a certain set of restrictions and policies and regulations that they need to conform with, right? They are moving into the cloud, but slowly. And you'll see that in the news coming up always, right? Some bank will say we are going cloud first. Maybe some industrial conglomerate is saying that we are moving to the cloud, but we're going to do it slowly because we have to change our practices. And we can understand with that, because moving to the cloud isn't just about changing vendors. Moving to the cloud is also about changing the way you do certain things, the way your practices are done, and how you would move it. And one of the trends in this case is kind of like a report which Gartner published last year. So Gartner had published this in mid 2019, where they forecasted that the worldwide public cloud would revenue would grow to 17%, right, in 2020. And the fact that they mentioned that this growth would happen on a number of billion, it was also because they assumed that it was going to be due to data center consolidation. But then something happened, right? COVID happened in early this year. It was a very unique situation for everyone, and even the tech industry was affected and impacted in some form or the other. And Gartner recently released another version of this report for this year, and they mentioned that it's still growing, right? The public cloud revenue is still growing, but it's a little lower estimate. It's 6.3%, but this time the need is a little different. If you notice, it's about desktop as a service. They're saying that desktop as a service secures highest growth. And we saw this we would have seen this within maybe our own circles with other companies, with our customers or clients, that enterprises and small companies who were aloof of the cloud, where they thought the cloud was a different beast or an entity altogether, they needed to start supporting remote workers. They needed to support any form of working which would reduce their cost, their business cost, so that they could still be operational and make a profit. And this was Gartner put this out as a report, and there are a lot of articles out there which support this also, which talk about how people and businesses are moving to a more remote workforce kind of a concept. The fact that they need everything to be on the cloud, the fact that they need to be able to access it from anywhere, basically changed the game for us. And we are already towards the end of August, and you can see right now we are doing sessions online, right? You could see this explosion in the growth of virtual conferences and conferencing tools. Every tool has been adding features like crazy, right? Every 2 weeks you'll be hearing some new feature coming in, whether you're using Zoom or whether you're using Google Meet or anything else. And even Chime, so from Amazon. So if anyone's using Chime, yay. And this is basically where you're seeing that there's a shift in the way we do things, the way we do even communications. And Gartner says that it's going to grow. We definitely see that it's going to grow. So if you're basically a decision maker of some sort within your company, within an organization, or you're consulting for someone, and if you see that they are not they are not very convinced about the cloud, you should definitely talk to them about the use cases. You should definitely talk to them about the impact that it has on the business. And if you're a developer or an architect who has not tried the cloud, 2020 is the perfect time to do this, right? Most of the cloud providers give you free trials. And they give you option to just have a 12-month trial. They give you enough services that you can sit and test. You could also run a simple application, and by simple I mean you could run your databases and your workloads and everything in, and then test it out before deciding how to leverage the cloud better. And there's a lot of tooling available on that, so I would definitely advise you to have a go at that. But yeah, I mean, I'm from AWS, so definitely I have to pitch for the cloud, right? If you do use AWS, yeah. If you're using other clouds, no problem. I mean, any cloud provider from the top 3-4 work. In this case. Next up is containerization. And what I see right now is that Kubernetes is gaining ground, right? Kubernetes is gaining ground in a lot of places, surprisingly. Not only with startups, it's also gaining ground with enterprises. And one of the reasons it has this is because Kubernetes brings this concept of having, managing all your distributed systems and your infrastructure all in one place. It creates this level playing field of sorts where you can deploy your applications as a container, put it into Kubernetes, and then orchestrate it around. And the fact that a lot of people see Kubernetes as a common interface to deploy applications, so that they can use Kubernetes on any infrastructure, right? Whether it's a cloud provider, whether it's their own on-prem, or whether even if it's a cluster of Raspberry Pis. Which is something I've been still trying to do, but I haven't gotten to it. And one other way to find out whether Kubernetes is really cool right now is there is a conference that happens every year, KubeCon. And KubeCon and Cloud Native Con, it just happened last week virtually, but every year it happens around in July, August-ish. And over the years, it has grown. So you have over the years from 2015, from 500 people, it has already gone to over 23,000 people, and it's cutting across different countries. And this year it was supposed to happen in more countries. And the fact that the attendance is growing, there's more interest happening. People of different varying levels are coming in to understand what Kubernetes is about, whether you're a beginner, whether you're an experienced and an advanced person who wants to do more things with Kubernetes. So there's no slowing down of Kubernetes in the future, the way I see it. And 2020 is only making it stronger, again, because of the situation we are in right now. So definitely, you could look at Kubernetes being at least a backbone of the cloud native movement. And here's a shameless plug. I am also part of another community called Cloud Native Malaysia. And there are similar meetups happening in different countries by Cloud Native. So by CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. I would suggest do join those meetups so that you can learn more about Kubernetes and the whole ecosystem and the different services and plugins that are available. So that you could, when you're thinking about your application architecture, you can decide better and how to do things, right? Then we have software architecture and microservices will be mainstream, but I would say kinda, right? And the reason for this is because if you had asked me this last year, I would have said, yeah, microservices is mainstream already, right? Anyone I talk to, whether it's a startup or whether it is even a big company who's looking at a new project and they're looking at a new product they want to build, the first thing they want to do is we want to go with the microservices approach, because they feel that a lot of the tooling out there, a lot of the frameworks out there is for microservices, and that is the new go, right? Like Agile was a couple of years ago. I say kinda because things change, and as IT folks, we all evolve, right? A lot of things we adopt, we usually then do tend to backtrack a bit. And recently there was an article by Uber which talked about how they're moving away from microservices and moving towards something known as macroservices. So basically now you have these three things instead of two, where you have microservices, you have the monolith, and then in between you have macroservices, which in a way for me looks like service-oriented architecture. But yeah, I mean, everyone wants a new name, so why not? And but microservices as a concept is still growing, right? And you can see that from the trends that are happening. So from if you take this from last year, the trend over the years has only grown on microservices in general. Also, the fact that you have this whole concept of infrastructure on the cloud, and then you have this concept of multiple services talking to each other, and then serverless as a concept coming up as a paradigm. That's something I want to touch upon in the future sessions also. And one of the reasons the microservice architecture even fits this whole conversation is because with cloud native applications, you are able to, in the whole cloud native paradigm, you're able to build software faster because you're able to build decoupled services. That being said, with microservices, you definitely have the trade-off of having multiple moving parts, and then you have communication overhead. You have a lot of chatter happening across your network, and and then if you're going with the traditional microservice concept, and I call it traditional because I have a certain aspect of it. The fact that you want to have a database per microservice, which means you cannot then have a single source of truth for certain data. You may have to duplicate data across, which means then you're talking about eventual consistency coming in. And there's, that whole train of thought starts coming in as part of microservices, which is why one of the reasons, if you read the article by Uber, you can just have a search on it. They talk about some of this already, and then they talk about why they feel macroservices make sense. And where I come from in this is that microservices is definitely going to stay. It's not going anywhere soon. And it's an architecture paradigm, like how monolith is an architecture paradigm. And for you, it is always about using the best architecture when you need it, right? So the way you code your applications, the way you architect it, the fact that you are able to transition between architectures, I think that is the key aspect of whichever architecture you choose. And evolutionary and transition architectures is something you would want to explore more. That's again one of the things in my mind I want to explore as part of SARCCOM in the coming meetups. So basically, there are a lot of articles available on microservices, so I won't go too much on that. For folks who are new to the whole thing, this is how it would look like. You have a monolith, and then you have this whole uh, uh, like a server that is serving everything, the UI backend and the data access layer, basically the database itself. And you would then have in microservices, you would have the UI separate from the actual business logic, which is then multiple business logic services, which are then talking to different databases, right? In this case, and depending where you're coming from, you would definitely see that as a pro or a con. And we could have discussions just on that, like for days. On programming overall, again, this is pretty. This is definitely, this may turn off some people, so I'm sorry, apologies beforehand itself. But I definitely see Python is going to eat the world. You're seeing that already happening, right? Whether you go in the data science field, whether it's machine learning, whether it's analytics and processing, web development from an API perspective, and even enterprise software development. Python is everywhere, and recently it's also being used. I mean, again, it's coming back into headlines because of its use in astronomy and in the scientific world. But that's where Python actually started from, for folks who don't know. And Python is everywhere. It's a programming language that's pretty popular, and there is a ranking, TOB ranking, which puts it at the third position after Java and C, because Java and C is still pretty in the norm. So yeah, I'm still in Java. So yeah, I mean, Java still works. Surprisingly, and this is basically how it looks like in 2020. You still see C and Java still growing over here, and then you have Python and climbing up. And this is from last year, so definitely this year there is much more adoption of Python as such as the norm, even in data scientist parlance. So that's basically where you would see. The more interesting part is that in the last one and a half years, it's actually doubled from 5%. It's gone to 10%, and there are many limitations in this whole trend report which you've seen, but it gives you an idea of where Python is going to be, and it's going to definitely continue. If anything, it may get upserted by JavaScript, for example. But JavaScript as a backend language definitely works. But JavaScript for let's say data science is still a little iffy. It's there. There are people who are building frameworks for it. I have seen people who have tried to execute JavaScript by loading a kernel for JavaScript in Python notebooks and Jupyter notebooks. But yeah, I mean, there is also an underlying trend of JavaScript fatigue. We had this concept of full stack developers for many years, and now people are saying, okay, I think just trying to fit JavaScript into everything doesn't really maybe help. Again, it comes back to trying to use the best tool for the right job. And if you're using microservices, it gives you that option to explore other languages and other frameworks. So why not, right? So this is basically there. Python is also being used in a lot of colleges and unis now as the introduction to programming course. We have seen this in the last one and a half years, where colleges announced that they're moving away from Java and moving to Python to explain, to teach people how to code stuff. So definitely, it's an upgrowing thing, and surprisingly, it's been there for almost 20 years. So, I mean, even beyond 20 years. So, yeah, a language that is growing now, when it's maturing more, kind of like lends to itself well. But that being said, even though overall Python is there, in the enterprise, you're still going to see Java and JVM reign, but your mileage may vary in this case. Like in this part of the world, in ASEAN at least. Okay, I can talk about Malaysia. In Malaysia, in the enterprise, I've seen .NET being the norm a lot. When you look at the Gulf, it's kind of like a mix. Certain like banks and all would use Java, but then afterwards you have other institutions that will use .NET. In India, you'd see a lot of Java being used in the enterprise. But yeah, I mean, your mileage may vary, I guess, in that. But you will still see it growing more because there has been a lot of additions happening to the JVM ecosystem, right? It's not only about writing code in Java anymore. You could write code now in Kotlin, you could write it in Scala, in Clojure, or even Groovy. And Java's runtime JVM is, I mean, I would say unanimously, it's one of the best pieces of software engineering we have seen in the last 20 years, right? The fact that it had a lot of these things built in before, of garbage collection, of memory management, and a lot of other things internally, helps. And the fact that people could build better languages on top of the JVM basically shows this. Now, one of the things that has taken the whole JVM ecosystem a bit backward is the fact that Oracle acquired them initially, and also the fact that they have started charging for the license. So this is from 2018, and they said that there are certain terms and conditions you have to look at, but Oracle required a subscription to use Java SE, and this was in 2018. One-time licenses, and then afterwards separate support contracts were supposed to go away. Right now, I think there were some changes in the last coming months and all about how things are changing. But you always have an option to also use the Open JDK instead of just the standard Java SDK. That's available, and there are companies who still want enterprise support, like enterprises. So definitely they would want to, just stick with Oracle. Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, agreed. I didn't mention the other side of my story. So I did Java for 11 years, and then when I joined Malaysia over here, I actually switched to .NET. Right, first time touching C#. I'd never done it before, and it was interesting. I mean, it was an interesting experience. The fact that I was able to do Java, I was able to translate a lot of that experience into .NET over just a month. And one of the things I appreciated in the .NET ecosystem was the IDE was much better. I mean, I was coming from Eclipse, right? I never tried JetBrains. I never tried that because it was paid software at that time. And but yeah, I mean, I did the Visual Studio, and then there's a license, and Visual Studio can do all these awesome things. So yeah, I mean, I can see the pros and cons of both the languages. So definitely, I agree. Wherever Java is strong, .NET will also be strong. Yeah, I mean, totally. Like I said, my opinion. So yeah, totally. it may change and differ in different countries and regions. But yeah, coming to why Java is actually, I see it as a potent language and an ecosystem is because of this. Because of its cargo ship, right? The size and the speed. Oracle has been driving some pretty interesting innovations in the ecosystem. So you have Graal VM. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of that. It makes Java much more nimble and faster. And there is no alternative right now to Java that offers enterprise-grade stability and support, unless you look at the .NET world. So from an enterprise perspective, if you're looking at enterprise support of some sort of the language, you only have two options, right? You have .NET and then you have Java. You don't have anything in the middle. Node.js tried. You had Loopback. Loopback is still there, I believe, for Node.js. I don't remember if IBM had taken over that project or it was something else. Another thing that's going for Java is also these two new frameworks that are being built right now, right? So you have the Spring framework that's been for some time, and in my mind, when I switched to C#, I'm like, you know what? I'm not too keen on the whole Spring thing, because I skipped that whole stuff, and I was for C# a lot. And then this happened over the microservices era, and especially with Kubernetes coming in a lot, that Micronaut and Quarkus as a framework started coming, which made microservices as a first-class citizen. The fact that they had cloud-native support from the get-go, and they are also targeting on the Graal VM, which is a much more faster runtime. And I'm seeing this as a gathering point of sorts for a lot of Java developers who have been in the enterprise for a long time and then been doing things the old way. Like if you saw in that previous one of the stack layer diagram where you talked about DTOs and how we do a lot of abstractions. One of the things we always complain about Java is Java is a very verbose language. I agree with that concept. The fact that we used to do a lot of abstractions up front so that we can write code, a lot of that goes away when you start looking at microservices. So then it becomes cumbersome to actually do a lot of these abstractions. So these frameworks have started coming up where they make it more lightweight. And I've actually spoken to veterans in Java who are actually saying we have started enjoying Java programming again because of this. So definitely this is a space to have a look at. I would say this definitely works. In the .NET space, I mean, we all know .NET Core is the go-to. Microsoft themselves, they announced that .NET Core is the future, and they're going to be removing .NET framework as such from main development. And .NET Core has been written from the ground up itself. So a lot of frameworks and languages you're seeing is being built for the microservices ecosystem. And this is the concept you would want to take forward. So whether you're Java or .NET, you are going to still be working with frameworks that will allow you to build microservices better and in a much more reliable fashion. So continuing with the programming trend, right? I also see a lot of these programming languages coming into the fore. So Rust is already being taken up in certain projects. You're seeing this. You're seeing this happening in big companies that are adopting Rust and Swift. Rust. So, for example, You'll see that in the next slide, who all are adopting it right now. And then you have Swift that came in from Apple, and the fact that Swift is now being used as a way to also do backend and front-end programming. And then you also have existing programming languages that are not often capable of taking the advantage of latest changes in hardware. So Rust and then things like Kotlin and all, they start coming in to start leveraging off the infrastructure we have. And if you notice now, there's been a shift in a lot of the IT trends, right? A lot of them are focusing on hardware again. They're trying to make architecture much more better. And then we see Rust, WASM. Yeah, definitely. WebAssembly is a big thing. I was debating whether to put WebAssembly or not on this, but I do agree WebAssembly is definitely there. And it is an upcoming thing, definitely in this case. So yeah, I mean, Rust has been adopted quite some time. So you can see this was a recent Stack Overflow thing survey from last year, and they actually showed about how the most loved languages coming up, even though it's not widely used, is Rust, and then you have TypeScript, Kotlin, and WebAssembly, and even Swift in this whole list. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like how it is. From who are sponsoring it right now? So AWS has been using Rust. There are 2 open source projects already out there from an infrastructure perspective. So you have a Firecracker, which is a micro VM environment which you can build using Rust, and then you have an operating system called Bottle Rocket, and these are all built with Rust. And we see adoption of Rust happening. AWS sponsored the Rust project also since 2019. Then you also see that Microsoft has been investing in Rust also, and they have been slowly moving a lot of their code bases from C to Rust. And they announced this because they wanted to show that they are able to build certain kind of software, like secure software in Rust. So definitely you're going to see this in this case. So yeah, I mean, Caucasus subatomic cannot be abused. It looks like viruses will be prevalent. Yeah, thanks for pointing out COVID over here, but yeah, appreciate it. And here's million viruses will become the beast. It's basically like if you're from an anime fan, you'll kind of like get that reference out there. So quickly jumping in, JavaScript is still there. I mean, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. I still look at JavaScript as a language that was built in 10 days, right? That's basically the tagline for it. And the fact that it has now taken over almost everything we use in some form or the other. And it was not a strong enough programming language. I come from a time when JavaScript was only used for widgets, right? Even before that, alert boxes on the page. And see where it has gone right now. The fact that you can do backend stuff, and then you can do a lot of other things. Even data science in a nutshell is happening. And then you have a lot of these frameworks that are coming up right now. Tong spoke about React, and then you have Vue.js, and then Angular, and Polymer, and then even Ember if you're from the Rails space. So a lot of things happening with the JavaScript space right now, and definitely it's going to just keep growing. Like I said, the ecosystem for JavaScript just keeps exploding every week, every month. You keep seeing a new tool. I have changed literally three tools for packaging and deploying. Right, I started with I believe it was Grunt before, and then it became Webpack, and then Yarn. And I don't even know, I mean, now what's happening next anymore, because I haven't been in touch with front end for the last some time. So yeah, JavaScript is definitely evolving. It's not going anytime soon. So going a little behind now from backend to from front end to a little bit of backend. REST APIs are definitely there. I mean, they're not going anywhere, and it's become the de facto thing if you're building microservices of some sort. But you'll also see that there has been a move towards other kinds of API services built using GraphQL, which is from Facebook, and then Protobuf using gRPC from Google. And Google basically developed gRPC as a reincarnation of RPC. If anyone's from the old times, they remember they used to build those report procedure calling, which used to work over TCP/IP, and they actually built that out, and then they use Protobuf for the messaging part in this case. And on the other hand, you have GraphQL that was built from by Facebook to actually build this graph layer of sorts for APIs. And the whole idea and the premise for that for GraphQL is that it's a layer that you can query and send specific parameters in to ask I only need data for this. So you can have a very customized and a very selective kind of approach to querying things, and then you can behind the scenes stitch all the data together from different services. So when we explored in my previous company, we explored GraphQL, and we were this close to actually starting with GraphQL in 2017. The fact that we were moving towards a more microservices architecture, we saw GraphQL as a plus point at that point of time. We still see that GraphQL adoption is definitely growing. Anyone in the Golang space is definitely using gRPC and Protobuf for their microservice development. So you are going to see more of these techniques and concepts being applied more often. But REST APIs are still there. The API gateways and API layers as a concept is still there. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. So yeah. Moving directly into artificial intelligence, because AIML as a space has been there for quite some time. TensorFlow is going to dominate. This is what I would have told last year, but now I'm not too sure, right? It can also be PyTorch. So for folks who don't know, TensorFlow is basically a framework, a deep learning framework that came out of Google, and they've been developing on it quite a lot. The fact that they also built chips, the TPUs, tensor processing units as part of their whole GCP infrastructure, they they started pushing this out more often to make it mainstream. And then Facebook also did not stand down the fact that they also invested more time and money, and then released PyTorch as a concept, as a deep learning library. And there are subtle differences between the two. The way TensorFlow and PyTorch works, I would definitely suggest to have a look at how they do things. And there's a lot of changes happening. TensorFlow 2.0, last year I remember there was a lot of fanfare for TensorFlow 2.0 coming in, because they were moving towards dynamic graphs, which PyTorch has been supporting for quite some time, and they are still fighting neck to neck. But you go in either one of these, you can't go wrong. There are other frameworks and libraries also in play right now. So I mean, this space is always changing. Like every 2-3 months, you just turn this way and that way, and you'll see that okay, there's a new framework already in vogue, just like JavaScript. So I don't see this slowing down anytime soon. Switching quickly into databases, right? I mentioned about how RDBMS was the norm in the old days, and then how NoSQL then became the hype and the new thing. And during the hype days of NoSQL, many people were laughing at SQL, right? The fact that you would use an RDBMS, they would come and say, "Why are you using SQL? Why are you using SQL? Don't use APIs, use these nice functions." In the end, everyone figured out that SQL as a language, the query language, actually works really well. So much so that a lot of the NoSQL databases started providing a SQL layer also on top of their NoSQL database, so that they can query this. You can't run away from SQL in some form or the other, because it's a very well thought kind of a paradigm for querying data sources across, whether it's in the same database or across different database systems. But how you tie in the data, have relationships, that of course is something that can change. So definitely that's something I'm seeing. Distributed SQL is becoming the norm. So if you this is from DB Engines. If folks don't know, there's a site called DB Engine that allows you to compare performances, and they do a lot of benchmarking on different databases across different parameters. A very good place to go and learn about this. And you could use this as a source, one of the sources of deciding, on your next project or product on what kind of database you want to use. So this is from 2019, and they had actually mentioned about how databases, even Oracle is still ranking because of enterprise, and how it is relational, but then how there is a lot of NoSQL databases like document database, Mongo database, MongoDB, and then you have a key value data store called Redis, which was used for caching initially. But now we are seeing an uptake in companies that are actually using this as a full-blown database, right? And then you have Cassandra as a white column, and then you have different cloud providers providing this. So in the top 10 itself, you can already see like 5-ish, right? 4 at least are NoSQL, right? And Elasticsearch, if anyone's used a search engine, definitely Elasticsearch is become the norm de facto if you want to just build a search engine. Anyone who has tried doing fast text search through SQL on RDBMS knows the pain in trying to index a lot of the data. Elasticsearch kind of solves all of that by creating a NoSQL text index of sort. So that's something I see growing. It's not definitely something that's gonna slow down. And we are also seeing that some of these databases like MongoDB is taking some of the RDBMS concepts and implementing it. Like joins came in 2-3 years ago. ACID transactions started coming in also. So definitely you would see NoSQL as a norm, but RDBMS also still work. The fact that RDBMS still have a use case for transactional data is definitely going to be there. From a distributed perspective, if you go on a cloud environment, you can, you have in AWS, you have Aurora, which is able to build these global databases, global tables across, and then have this lower RTO times. Then you have Google Spanner, which is also like a global database that allows you to scale across the globe. And then you can also use the open source databases, or community based, or even companies that are offering it from out there. From the top of my head, I remember VoltDB and CockroachDB. But there are more in the pipeline. I keep forgetting. I believe FaunaDB was another one from before. So that space is growing. It's not going anytime soon. So distributed databases do become a norm, especially if you're doing microservices in general. Another thing I see, and this you may have a contention point, because a lot of people talk about whether coding is if you use a low code or no code platform where you don't write code, are you actually a developer? I'll leave that philosophy discussion for some other time. I have used a low code platform before. It was useful in an enterprise space because it allowed us to build applications quicker, so that the development team can focus on solving bigger business problems, so that the CRUD apps, the create, read, update, delete apps don't have to actually be built again and again. This is actually getting kind of good traction. Last year, we had a lot of enterprise offerings available, right? So you have these from OutSystems is one which I've used before. You have Mendix, which Siemens bought a couple of I think it was 1-2 years ago. And then Microsoft has been in this space for quite some time. If anyone remembers Access, right? That's kind of there. And then Salesforce is also doing it. But in the last 6 months to 1 year, even the cloud providers have started jumping in. So Amazon announced Honeycode. I believe it was 3 months ago, and then Google has something similar, but then they recently rebranded it, and now there is this whole slew of SaaS services that are coming up, which allow you to use maybe a spreadsheet or just a simple database, and then they are able to create components for you, so you can just drag and drop and then create these things. So you would ask, who in the right mind is actually use a service like this? But you'll be surprised. To give you an example, I'm connected with a lot of uni tech clubs over here. Tech clubs in universities in Malaysia, and one of the universities over here recently wanted to build an application for internship. Right, they wanted to provide an application so that the students can apply for internships, and then companies can put their intern vacancies inside that. And they didn't want to have too much of a management overhead, because getting the uni to support them to host the application and then getting a domain name all would be painful. So what they instead did is they used one of these services, low-code application service. They used a spreadsheet behind the scenes, and they just built this thing in like half a day, and they released it out into the market. And it blew up so much that they actually started getting other uni students immediately in to start using it. Under the hood, it is using a cloud provider. The fact that it was able to scale to thousands of students in a span of a couple of days was impressive. And the fact that they didn't have to code a lot, so that they could just use it for tracking whatever they need to, kind of gives you an idea of where we're going with in terms of applications and how we develop things. Most probably, the way I see this panning out is you're going to see simple applications like CRUD applications being built on low-code platforms like this, so that development teams can start focusing more on business problems. They can start focusing on the more critical problems that need more thinking, more brain power, and it's about us moving up the value chain, right? Because how long are you going to keep building CRUD apps? You might as well wait for, if anyone's in the AI space and deep learning space, you must have heard of GPT-3. I'm waiting for GPT-3 by Open.ai. I'm actually waiting for that to come in and start building CRUD apps, so that I could just talk to it, or give it a set of instructions and say, build this. And there are some demos already available on some folks using GPT-3 to build a React web app. There are some examples on YouTube. Just have a look at that. I definitely see that as a future. So if you're still building CRUD apps, I would suggest start moving up the value chain. So in closing, I'll just summarize with where I see us going. So just looking ahead into the future. Again, I want to put this back because this article, Khalil has actually spoken also about a roadmap. He's actually spoken about where you want to start with details. I would suggest for anyone who's new to the whole architecture ecosystem, do go through this. It's a very good way to track yourself on where you're going on this journey of architecture. Yeah, I mean, totally. If GPT-3 can do a lot of things on the cloud, I would really love it. You could use CloudFormation, Terraform, or even any like CDK, Cloud Development Kit. Terraform is definitely a very common layer across multiple cloud providers. I would want GPT-3 to do that, but yeah, let's hope maybe somebody over here can build a startup just on that. So this is where I would want anyone who's beginning in the architecture ecosystem to start. But if you came into this talk to understand, okay, you know what, I'm an architect, I've been here for quite some time, I understand this whole landscape, tell me what's new, tell me what's happening, I would point to 2 resources to have a look at this. Time does not permit me to go through every point in this slide, but what I can do is we could have talks on this in the future where we talk about what is the norm right now. So for example, if you go with the early majority, this is the kind of things you want to focus on right now. So GraphQL is becoming the norm in mainstream. You have reactive programming, like Tong kind of mentioned about that as part of the front end, and even in the back end it does happen because you're supporting event sourcing and event streams under the hood. Protocol wise, HTTP2 and gRPC is becoming a norm. Event driven architecture has become a norm of sorts because that's the only way you can scale an application, because you're building asynchronous components in your application architecture. CQRS, command query read, I forgot the S what it was. Command query read, yeah, the last one is basically how you would want to dissect your application in such a way that the command and the queries are separated out. This allows you to actually start looking at purpose-built databases also, where you can have a read-only database for queries, and then you have a command database for doing the writes. So your database which you write to becomes the source of truth, and then you would then sync data. How you sync data is up to you. Eventual consistency as a concept starts coming in over here, and then event sourcing as a concept where you can replay events so that you can move back in time to a certain data point using the events that are being stored internally. Late majority microservices has kind of become the norm. Every startup, every unicorn you hear about has been building microservices. I'm yet to hear about a unicorn that has built as only having a monolith. But definitely there is a shift between not only microservices. There's definitely a shift towards having a more composed architecture. Domain-driven design is also becoming mainstream. In this side of the world, I was actually surprised to see DDD being implemented even by mobile app developers. I am definitely going to be exploring this more further in terms of from an architecture perspective. Also, I remember I think it was last month when in Jakarta the session happened for domain-driven design. Definitely, I don't understand Bahasa because I'm a foreigner, but definitely I would want to see similar kind of sessions happening again in English also, because it's a really good concept to learn, because it allows you to hash out your domains upfront before you actually start building things. So it doesn't go into the waterfall world, but it definitely allows you to hash out things better, and it builds you this whole corpus of what you call a ubiquitous language. The fact that the same language and the terms and glossary is being used by developers, architects, team leads, and product managers, and even your business stakeholders, it allows everyone to understand what's actually happening in front of them, versus it being just I'm doing React, or I'm doing Angular, or I'm doing microservices. So I see DDD as a big enabler in having more better product conversations within a company. Behavior driven design, I'm surprised it's in the late majority. I remember BDD being the norm since Rails was in 2010ish, and BDD is still there. It's there in other languages also. There are a lot of frameworks for this. Test driven design is definitely the norm, I would say. I'm kind of surprised why it's still early, which is why some of these surveys you would always want to take with a grain of salt. A lot of these early adopters is something you would want to explore with, but also question whether they will still stick around or not, right? So this link is already there, infoq.link. I would definitely suggest you to have a look at this for any architect who has already been there in the industry for quite some time and wants to know what's the next big thing they need to be working on and to learn about, right? You can see micro front ends, which we spoke about a little bit briefly, already being the innovators, even though some companies have been doing micro front ends for many years, but it's hitting mainstream already. But if you're an enterprise architect, and I know I asked about enterprise architecture before, I just didn't want to keep them on the side. If you're an enterprise architect and you want to understand architecture, how it has evolved, there is an insight which Deloitte had given, and Deloitte is very good at making things, let's put it, high level. Yeah. And they have actually spoken about how scope has changed over the years, how control has changed over the years, how business impact has changed over the years. So I would definitely suggest to have a look at this. The fact that the approach has become an agile concept, agile has become the norm in problem solving, and then how teams have to be collaborative and engaged. So you need to break down the silos. DevOps as a concept is enabled so that you can break down the silos a lot. So things like that are there. I have my last slide right now. Just before I move into this, what I just wanted to tell is that you notice a lot of the things I spoke about was about technology, right? I spoke about the languages, I spoke about what is going to happen in the near future, and things that we need to be looking out for when you're thinking about architecture. Whether you're a developer, whether you're an architect, these things are useful from a development perspective or from an architecture perspective. But there's something which we always miss out when we talk about architecture, and it's about empathy, right? One of the things I believe, if you're an architect, one of the things you need to have is empathizing with the developers, empathizing with the product team and the stakeholders. The reason is because you, as an architect, especially if you're playing that role right now, you are the glue between all these different disparate systems within an enterprise or within an organization. And a lot of times your conversation will be less on technology, and it will be more on trying to understand what the other person's talking about, understand about what they are, where they are coming from, and why they want to solve a certain problem in a certain way. And I have seen this my fair share in my previous company, and I see this now, in fact, every day in AWS also. When we talk about architecture, we talk about the cloud. A lot of times we talk about how an organization is functioning right now, right, and how they take down requirements, how they manage business. So I want to leave you all with this slide. The fact that I just wanted to show you that this was a survey that was done, 80,000hours.org. It's another organization, and they made a survey of sorts to decide on what skills people find most employable, right? So this cuts across a lot of domains, but primarily it was still in the IT sector kind of. And if you notice, a lot of the technology stuff starts coming more lower, right? So whether you're talking about technology design, whether you're talking about maybe systems evaluation kind of, you can talk about that, and then afterwards mathematics, science, and then installation of systems. But a lot of you just take the top 10, right? You're talking about judgment and decision making, and that's one of the first things you do as an architect. The fact that you need to be able to present a trade-off to your stakeholder to understand, okay, I know GraphQL is doing very well in the industry right now, but for the kind of way we organize our things, I don't think GraphQL is the right approach right now, right? So that you start avoiding this whole jumping on a bandwagon. So that's where having judgment and then decision-making skills really matter a lot. Having critical thinking so that you are able to think against the grain. A lot of times you need to be challenging the status quo, but you also need to be challenging the status. You also need to be challenging the hype that's happening around you, right? Time management is another thing, definitely, because we could definitely just tell everyone, hey, let's do microservices, and then you find out 1 year later you're still implementing microservices without deploying anything to production. Monitoring performance is another thing. This comes under DevOps, especially if you will watch any DevOps talk that talks about the concepts. It talks about this closed feedback loop where you want to have once you deploy or something, you're also observing it in production. So that you are able to have this logging, monitoring, and observability at a high level, so that anything that you find, you're able to take it back to when you develop things and then make it better. So you have this continuous improvement loop happening, which is basically the whole concept of agile as such. If you take it from the Japanese concept of Kaizen, and then all these other concepts are. Definitely, I'll be sharing the slide. Link in on the Meetup page and even on the YouTube channel, but this is basically where it is. So a lot of us in our jobs, especially if you're doing an architecture role, there's a lot of soft skills in play, right? And a lot of this helps you in becoming a much better architect, because you would start looking at as an architect, you also need to be able to see the forest and then skip the trees, right? So instead of just being a narrow focused person, you need to be someone who can go at a 10,000 feet level view, 20,000, and even a 50,000 feet level view. So soft skills help you a lot in that case, because you're able to make better decisions and able to be more objective on certain things. So this is something I want to tell as part of this whole address of where we want to go with architecture. And I want this to be the base for what we're going to cover in the near future with different sessions. So with that, I would like to thank you so much for your time. I know it's pretty late, and apologies for overshooting this by almost an hour, but I appreciate the fact that you all stuck around and saw this. I am definitely open for any comments and feedback even later. You don't have to send it now if you all want to go back and do your stuff right now, because it's already time. And we are always there on Meetup and on the Facebook page also, on SARCCOM. So do please give your feedback and comments. We are going to be scheduling the next meetup soon for September, and we'll be scouting out for speakers. So if anyone's interested, whether you're in Malaysia, Indonesia, or any other country right now, and if you're interested in sharing about architecture, do reach out and do ping us on Facebook. So with that, thank you so much, and have a safe evening, all of you, and good night, and see you next time.